Hello everyone, so during this video today, I'm happy to say we'll be finishing off my Pachycephalosauridae and learning some fun facts about the bone wars along the way. So on this video today, I'll be busy sculpting away with plasticine clay on my Pachycephalosauridae. And as I add the final layers of clay, we'll be adding details along the way, bringing this prehistoric creature back to life, you could say. But we're not just working with plasticine clay today, we'll also be adding some feathers to this dinosaur, I say. Although I think it's safe to say our non-avian head-butting dinosaur will not be flying away. But in regards to my poetry today, we'll be talking about the Bone Wars, I do say. The second half of the 19th century was a prosperous time for American paleontology. States like Wyoming and Colorado turned out to be full of fossil-rich bone beds, containing never-before-seen animals. Those who found them assured their place in the annals of history. With such high stakes, it's understandable there would be some sense of competition between scientists. However, the feud between Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Draker Cope went far beyond your typical professional rivalry. And I think that's putting it lightly. These two men ended up hating each other because they ended up going on sacrificing career, money, legacy just to see the other one destroyed in a bizarre conflict known as the Bone Wars. So let's talk about the thing that really kind of cued this off, the boneheaded or butt-headed mistake. It's difficult to say when exactly Marsh and Cope decided they hated each other. When the two had first started meeting professionally, they had an annual relationship. But perhaps behind closed doors, they found each other rather grating. An unofficial start to the rivalry happened in 1869, when Cope published his latest discovery on the Elasmosaurus. This was supposed to be a moment of triumph for the young paleontologist, but he made a half-witted blunder, which turned out to be his grand humiliation. Nowadays, we know Elasmosaurus and most other plesiosaurs, for that matter, have really long necks. Cope thought the neck was the tail, so he stuck the head at the short end, which in reality turned out to be its actual tail. But Marsh pointed out the vertebrae were positioned incorrectly, which led to an argument. The two decided to divert to esteemed naturalist Joseph Leidy. According to the story, Leidy inspected the exhibit, removed the head, and placed it on the other end. Later, he also published an official correction to Cope's paper. It is a little curious that only Marsh and Cope's wrath with this episode. Anyone else would have spotted this mistake eventually. Maybe it's because these two already disliked each other at this point, and this was just more fuel for the fire. But maybe it wasn't about what Marsh had said, but how he had said it, and how he kept flaunting Cope's mistake in the public afterwards. Now, a clash of cultures. Aside from the fact that both Cope and Marsh were paleontologists, they appear to be polar opposites, which assuredly would have caused friction between the two. Cope was born into a rather wealthy family and considered himself a gentleman. Marsh, however, was a little more rough around the edges, growing up poor. Fortunately for him, his uncle was George Peabody, one of the richest and most generous philanthropists of his time, who paid for Marsh's education. The two also had different ideas on how to go about being a paleontologist. Cope was a man in the field. He wasn't afraid to get a little dirty, and traveled frequently to dig sites, and his part of the United States Geological Survey. Marsh, on the other hand, preferred to do his work from the comforts of his office, studying fossils that his agents brought to him. He persuaded his uncle to fund the Peabody Museum of Natural History of Yale, which of course was rewarded with a position as the professor of paleontology for Marsh. This was more of a symbiotic gesture, as Marsh's own inheritance meant he didn't have to teach to make money. In fact, during his fossil career, he only led 4 fossil hunting expeditions with his students in 1870 and 1873. As both prominent naturalists, Cope and Marsh had strong but different opinions on a major topic of that day, which was evolution. Marsh was a strong supporter of Darwinian's natural selection. Cope was a founder of neo-Lamarckism. That's a mouthful, I'm glad that didn't stick. For more than one reason, and here's why. because it is a school of thought that certain adaptations that are required over an organism's lifetime can be inherited directly by its offspring. What a world that would be. I mean, life finds a way, but that's stretching it, in my opinion. Now, some early expeditions. Cope and Marsh had the luxury of starting their paleontological careers during the time the American West had recently shown to be a treasure trove of fossils. Their early expeditions were marked by a game of them constantly trying to one-up one another. Then, on top of that, the two were actively trying to sabotage one another. In 1872, Cope joined the Geological Survey led by Ferdinand Hayden. The position wasn't paid, and Cope even had to cover his own expenses, but it provided him with great opportunities and resources to collect fossils. The journey was incredibly fruitful, and Cope discovered dozens of new animal species. But the extent of support afforded to him had its limits. At one point, the paleontologist traveled to a new site and expected to find men, horses, equipment waiting for him, but he was alone, so he had to pay for a crew out of his own pocket, and unwittingly hired a couple of men who also happened to work for Marsh, which angered the latter. For his expeditions, Marsh happened to travel to the Dakota Territories, and struck a deal with Chief Red Cloud of the Sioux tribe. In order to get his help, the paleontologist would pay for fossils, and lobby on behalf of the Sioux in Washington, D.C., raising concerns about government corruption and fraud. For his part, Marsh actually kept up his end of the bargain. Now, it kind of pains me to say this part, but it's part of history, prompting Chief Red Cloud to claim him as the best white man he ever saw. Jesus Christ. These first expeditions marked the beginning of an unfortunate trend for the two scientists, one that would end up tainting their credibility. They both got into the habit of making rushed telegrams describing all of their new discoveries, leaving the full accounts till they returned home. They didn't care about being accurate, they just wanted to be first. Now, a deal with lakes. By its nature, paleontology isn't a solitary profession. Most of the lab work can be done alone, but actually securing fossils requires some interaction between agents, geologists, and other paleontologists. Therefore, many people like Joseph Leidy or Ferdinand Hayden found themselves unwillingly part of the bone wars, forced to take a side. Another one of these men was Lakes, considered now one of the founding fathers of American geology. He unwittingly strained the relationship between Cope and Marsh even further, when he wrote both to inform them of a new fossil discovery they had made in Colorado. At first, he only wrote to Marsh. He was slow to answer back, so he also inquired with Cope. Eventually, Marsh responded, clearly interested in Lake's findings. When he heard Cope also knew about it, he then sent an agent to meet with the geologist to strike a deal. Understandably, Cope was furious when he learned Lake rescinded the offer and started working with his nemesis. The arrangement turned out very well for Marsh, among other things. Lake collected for him a mysterious giant serrated tooth, which was reclaimed to be the first T.rex tooth ever recovered. Now, war at Como Bluff. Wyoming was the true battlefield of the Bone Wars and where it was fought, and Como Bluff was its epicenter. During the late 19th century, the area was revealed to be one of the richest deposits of fossils in the country. In the late 1870s, the Union Pacific was building the first transcontinental railroad through the region. Two workers, William Reed and William Carter, sent word to Marsh that they had found a lot of bones. The scientists sent an agent to investigate the claim. Upon hearing other parties were also interested in the area, Marsh quickly drew up a contract to secure the duo's services. According to the agreement, Reed and Carlin would do their best to keep Cope out of the area. It actually did the opposite. In 1878, rumors of the major findings were being leaked. The Laramie Daily Sentinel published stories on the matter, including the exorbitant prices Marsh was apparently paying. The last part was exaggerated by two railway workers, extensively to gain leverage or a better deal from other parties. By the end of 1878, Carlin had switched sides and started working for Cope. And then the gloves were off. The excavations at Como Bluff lasted for 15 years as both Cope and Marsh opened up as many quarries as possible. The men routinely engaged in espionage, bribery, and even outright theft. On one occasion, the rival crews started an all-out fight by throwing rocks at each other. Perhaps the most heinous action from the supposed men of science was that they sometimes had fossils permanently destroyed, or entire excavation sites filled in to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. For the work, as the years spent at the sites, they were not happy ones. Because neither Marsh or Cope were particularly present at the quarries, they left other men in charge, such as Reed, Lake Carlin, and Frank Wilson. Tensions rose higher and boiled over between them, and sooner or later, all of them quit. Carlin and Weston even went independent, selling their finds to the highest bidder. Now, front page news. For the most of its duration, the rivalry between Cope and Marsh was contained within the scientific community. As you might imagine, the average person had little knowledge of what was going on within the paleontological world, apart from the petty bickering, sabotage, and stealing that had been going on between the scientists. That changed in the mid-1880s when Cope saw his opportunity to ruin Marsh professionally. As mentioned previously, Cope worked under the American Geological Survey under Ferdinand Hayden. This was a pretty sweet gig for the paleontologist, so naturally Marsh wanted it for himself. He got his wish when one of his friends named John Wesley Powell became the new director for the scientific agency in 1881. However, a few years later, Congress wanted to investigate the administration for wasting government funds. Cope relished in the idea that Marsh could be in serious legal trouble. But unfortunately for him, both Marsh and Powell got off absolutely scot-free. Not one to easily accept defeat, Cope reached out to a journalist from the New York Herald and offered to reveal to the world the real Charles Marsh. The writer saw past Cope's obvious hatred for the paleontologist and sniffed out the real story. The newspaper ran the story with the headline, "Scientists Wage Bitter Warfare." The Bone Wars was now front page news. And this led to the overall destruction of their careers. However, we must thank them for at least getting dinosaurs out into the general public. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have for the Bone Wars. There is definitely a lot more on this topic. However, unfortunately, we will have to cover that at a later date. I'm not exactly sure when, but I'm sure the next dinosaur project or the next dinosaur that I run into, well, a lack of information on, we will be revisiting this topic. At any rate, I hope you enjoyed the stop-motion Pachycephalosaurus project. I definitely had fun during this project, and it turned out to be quite a cute dinosaur, oddly enough, for a head-butting monstrosity. And if you also enjoyed this project, be sure to let me know by leaving a thumbs up on this video and or commenting below what you think of it. Perhaps share with your friends, and if you're new to this channel and enjoyed the content, well, be sure to subscribe because there's a lot more where that came from. I usually do videos once a week, and then I do daily shorts, updating you on various projects. So be sure to check those out if you would like to learn more about this channel, and well, if you would like to stay more notified, be sure to check out the links in the post description. And if you have any suggestions for future projects, be sure to let me know in the comments below. Speaking of which, I will briefly be mentioning what will be coming up next. Now, my previous project was the G-Man, which, well, did unfortunately significantly better than this project with the view count. In retrospect, honestly, that's kind of a good thing, but I was definitely not expecting it to be this low. So, I recently saw a preview, you should all know, about an upcoming Godzilla show, which may involve some math. So I just wanted to let you all know it's in T-5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Anyway, thank you for sticking around to the very end of the video. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed the content, comment below what you think, share it with your friends, and be sure to subscribe if you're new. Anyway, that's enough from me. Till next time, take it easy. And quick shout out to Dragonclaw for spotting Milton the moose.